Tuesday. We're on day 3 of Holy Week, 2 days after Jesus entered Jerusalem on a lowly donkey, the day after he cursed the fig tree as analogous to the lack of producing fruit of the temple. And Tuesday is sort of it's the day that the Jewish leaders and Jesus go head to head in this mental gymnastics. It wasn't even a battle because it was really a slaughter. But here in Mark chapter 11, starting with verse 20, we get the chronology, we get details of how they came to Jesus looking to trick him, and he basically put them on their back. And then not only did he put them on their back, he questioned them in a manner that showed them who was the boss. And as we see, this was the last straw for them, wherein very soon thereafter, they plotted to make these Jesus' final days before he was to be crucified. So Mark 11, verse 20 starts with this. In the morning, again, this is Tuesday. In the morning, as they went along, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots. Now, this is the fig tree that we discussed yesterday, being Monday, that Jesus accursed. So they saw the fig tree withered from the roots. Withered from the roots just meaning it's dead. I mean, if it's dead to the roots, it's not coming back. Peter remembered and said to Jesus, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered." "Have faith in God," Jesus answered. Pretty simple. That's the cure. Have faith in God and your roots won't wither. So the fig tree Jesus cursed on Monday had died. As we discussed, now, this was a frame for an allegory for the temple. The fig tree died because Jesus had cursed it for not bearing fruit. Pretty straightforward. This paralleled the temple which Jesus ransacked because it was not producing fruit, so it would follow that it too would shrivel up and die. The fig tree wasn't producing fruit. Jesus condemned it to death. The temple wasn't producing fruit. What was supposed to happen with the temple? Just a quick, kind of like what I've liked to do over the last couple of days, to give you sort of perspective, context, some history here. In the early years of the Israelite kingdom, the Ark of the Covenant was periodically moved about among several sanctuaries. After King David's capture of Jerusalem, though, many a generation before, let's say 1,000 years or so before, once King David captured Jerusalem, however, the Ark was moved to Jerusalem. This action joined Israel's major religious object with the monarchy, and the city itself became the central symbol of the union between the Israelite tribes. So it became the capital, in essence, of Judaism. On the site for a future temple, David chose Mount Moriah, or also known as Temple Mount, where it's believed that Abraham built an altar on which he was going to sacrifice Isaac. This first temple was constructed during the reign of David's son, Solomon, and completed in about 957 BC. Again, almost 1,000 years before we're talking about, as Jesus was in the city. Other sanctuaries retained their religious functions, however, until Josiah, who reigned from about 640 to 609 BC, abolished them. So, in essence, you had the temple in Jerusalem, and you had a bunch of other temples who maintained their religious functions, but under King Josiah, who was a good king, he abolished their functions, making this temple the only place in the entire kingdom of Judah where you could place a sacrifice. We talked about this the other day. During this time of the year, the Passover, it's thought that the city swelled 5 times, from 40 to 200,000 people, in large part because many came to make sacrifices. So the temple, though later it suffered defeat, it just suffered destruction at the hands of King Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, who removed the temple treasures in about 604 BC, and they totally destroyed the building. It was abolished. The destruction of and they deported the Jews to Babylon. So they destroyed the temple. They enslaved the Jews and deported them. And this was seen as a fulfillment of a prophecy, and therefore strengthened Judaic belief and awakened the hope for reestablishment of an independent Jewish state. Now, Cyrus, the founder of a later dynasty, the Achaemenid dynasty of Persia, and conqueror of Babylonian in about 583 BC, issued an order allowing exiled Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. The work here was completed in about 515 BC, and there was no known detail of the plan for the second temple, which was constructed as a modest version of the original. So this first one was elaborate. It was the Taj Mahal of its day, built by Solomon. The second version was meant to just be a modest version of it. Remember now, they had moved from being the rulers of their land to being enslaved by the Babylonians, and now another Persian empire. The ark was gone, but the rituals, however elaborate, were conducted by well-organized families of priests and the Levites, one of the 12 tribes. Under Roman rule, when Herod renovated and upgraded the Herodian temple, now we fast forwarded. We fast forwarded now to within the era, the time of Jesus Christ. We are talking about Herod. Herod being the one who attempted, Herod being the string of rulers who, one of whom attempted to kill Christ at his birth. When Herod renovated and upgraded the temple, it was again the center of Israelite life. It's not only the focus of the religious ritual, but also the repository of Holy Scriptures and other national literature in the meeting place of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin was the highest court of Jewish law during the Roman period. So this helps to give you some context. We talked about the temple, Jerusalem, the Sanhedrin, and how in this day, the temple is the place, the sole place of sacrifice. It's the meeting place of the Sanhedrin, which was their highest ruling court for all of the Jewish kingdoms. Now, this temple, though, and so that tells you how important it was. This was the center of Jewish religious life, but Jesus cursed it. This is the place that Jesus cursed. The temple as the place where the people had to come to worship and pay tribute to God had been condemned. And the Jewish leaders were not having it. Because he was so popular, though, the high priest and his council could not, in public, roust Jesus. But they figured that they could discredit him, and they tried. Mark 11 through 13 gives us that story, gives us those scenes. So they figured they could discredit him by destroying his authority. So Jesus arrives, and I guess picking up with verse 27 in chapter 11, it starts that they arrived again in Jerusalem, and while Jesus was walking in the temple courts, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders came to him. By what authority are you doing these things, they asked, and who gave you authority to do this? In other words, who are you to come in here and disrupt the temple? Jesus replied, I will ask you one question. Answer me this, and I will tell you by what authority I'm doing these things. Now, verse 30 starts, John's baptism, was it from heaven or of human origin? Tell me. That was a question Jesus posed to the Sanhedrin, to the Jewish leaders. John's baptism, was it from heaven or of human origin? Tell me. They discussed it among themselves and said, if we say from heaven, he will ask, then why didn't we believe? Why didn't we believe him? But if we say of human origin, they feared the people, for everyone held that John was really a prophet. So they answered Jesus, I guess the obvious answer. We don't know. I guess the honest answer, we don't know. Then Jesus responded to them, neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things. So in essence, Jesus posed a question to them. They said, I don't know. He had already told them he would give them an answer if they could answer his question. They didn't answer. He didn't answer. Pretty slick. So their attempt to entrap Jesus failed. This was an awkward response to a brilliant play, by Jesus. He was playing chess while they weren't even playing checkers, man. They were playing tic-tac-toe. They who questioned Jesus were the chief priests and elders, the folks at the top of the domination system, which we discussed a couple of days ago, and their employed scribes. Jesus avoided their inquisitive trap, made them admit to not knowing, and then taught them the following parables. The parable of the tenants is the first. Jesus began to speak to them in parables. Instead, and this starts with Mark chapter 12. Jesus then began to speak to them in parables. Instead of going full blast on these religious Gestapo, he told them, that's not scripture, it actually just states, Jesus then began to speak to them in parables. And then this is me. Instead of going full blast on these religious Gestapo, he told them pointed stories that read them the right act on their conduct. So Jesus liked to use parables because it explained very clearly to those who were gifted to understand, and those who were not were left guessing. But it was still I guess it was still an entertaining story. But in Mark 12, 1 through 12, he told them, a man planted a vineyard. He put a wall around it, dug a pit for the winepress, and built a watchtower. Let me say that again. A man planted a vineyard. He put a wall around it, dug a pit for the winepress, and built a watchtower. Then he rented the vineyard to some farmers and moved to another place. At harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants to collect from them some of the fruit of the vineyard. But instead of paying, they seized him, beat him, and sent him away empty-handed. Then he sent another servant. They struck this man on the head and treated him shamefully. Instead of doing something different, he then sent another, and that one they killed. He sent many others. Some they beat, others they killed. He had one left to send, a son whom he loved. He sent him last of all, saying, they will respect my son. But the tenants said one to another, nope, we're not playing that game. Well, that's not exactly what they said. But the tenants said one to another, this is the heir. Come, let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours. So they took him and killed him and threw him out of the vineyard. Sound familiar? What then will the owner of the vineyard do? He will come and kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. Haven't you read this passage of scripture? The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The Lord has done this, and it is marvelous in our eyes. Then the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders looked for a way to arrest him because they knew he had spoken the parable against them. But they were afraid of the crowd. So they left him and went away. It's something here because it's reading in listening in the parable. I mean, it speaks dead on to what's going on right there. I mean, we know that now, having been able to rewind and see history in the past. But Jesus was saying, hey, you know, many prophets had come before me. And what did you do to them? They told you the truth. You rejected their stories. You beat them. You killed them. You imprisoned them. You treated them poorly. And you're going to do the same to me. But those who you commend will become the cornerstone. They will become the cornerstone. And my Father will come and take care. He will take care of you for this. This indictment of these leaders, the greedy, the murderous tenants who Jesus rejected, I don't know if I need to break this down any further, but it's just kind of giving some nomenclature, some numerics here. God is the landlord. Give an attachment. God in this analogy is the landlord. He is the landlord who built the vineyard. He rented it to the children of Israel who simply need to pay homage to God. They need to show God his glory. They didn't. God sent one prophet. He sent two prophets. He sent three prophets and more to advise them, and one after another, they were slain and assaulted. Finally, God says he is going to send in his big guns, his biggest, his son. However, instead of listening to the son, they determined that they were going to kill him and reap what he was due. Because of their continued murderous acts specifically to the son, God, the landlord, will levy punishment on tenants, evict them, and bestow the benefits that they were to receive to others. They killed the son who was the cornerstone of the vineyard that the landlord built. The Pharisees and Herodians, who were normally at odds over strict religious congruence and governmental intervention, were bedfellows in their opposition to Christ. So it was the high priests, those who ruled over the temple, as well as the Roman leaders who were appointed to rule over Jerusalem, were normally at odds, but they were in lock sync in their opposition to Christ because he threatened their power. He threatened their power. They knew he was referring to them and wanted to seize and take him out right on the spot. But they refrained because they were afraid of the crowds. So in essence, the people who Christ came to save were in a way giving him temporary cover. Jesus continued to go on in the temple. And he continued to go at the officials. He came with another. And he came with another parable. So later, though, while he was there, the Pharisees and the Herodians tried to catch Jesus in another trap. So they came to him and said, and now this is picking up in Mark again. Mark 12, verse 14. They came to him and said, "Teacher, we know that you are a man of integrity." So they come in flattering, trying to induce him with some flattery. You're a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we? So they posed the question to Christ, thinking they were going to trap him. They thought they were slick. They came to him in the most complimentary manner, calling him teacher, a man of integrity. But Jesus knew that their hypocrisy was glaring. All right, he knew. And he says, "Why are you trying to trap me? Bring me a denarius and let me look at it." Knowing full well what he was going to see. They brought the coin and he asked them. Whose image is this? Caesar, they replied. Then Jesus said to them, "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God." We a lot of times get caught on just that first part. Give to Caesar what's Caesar's. Should we pay taxes? Yes, we should pay our taxes. But also give to God what's God. And upon his response, they were amazed at him. The Pharisees were great sticklers for the liberty of the Jews. And if he should say it is lawful to give tribute to Caesar, they were going to be incensed. The common people were against him. And the Herodians would underhand assist them in doing this. They were been lockstep, as I said before. One's enemy, I guess what is the saying? My enemy's enemy is my friend. The Herodians were great sticklers for the power of Rome. They were Roman appointed officials, right? And if he should discontinue or discountenance the paying of tribute to Caesar, he would have incensed the governor against them. And yea, the Pharisees against their own principles would join with them in taking Christ out. So it's no new thing for those, like I said a second ago, it's no new thing for those who are at odds with one another to join in confederacy against their common enemy, so to say, who in this situation was Christ. My enemy's enemy is my friend, right? This was cold. They were trying to make Jesus look bad, but ended up with possibly one of the best quotables ever, one of the most quoted lines of scripture ever. Give to Caesar what is his, but more importantly, give to God what's God's.